Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Eagles Nest Online Sunday morning service. As we enter our Thanksgiving season, we are praying with you that you have a wonderful time with your family and friends and some much needed rest and relaxation before the craziness of what we know is coming next. Join us this morning as we hear from Pastor Bob on the very last in his series, Finding Jesus. But for now, let's enjoy the worship service with Paul and the crew. And don't forget to stay tuned after the service to hear from Pastor Jay what's happening here at Eagles Nest. Have a great day and enjoy the service.
Worthy of every song we could ever sing, worthy of all the praise we could ever bring, worthy of every breath we could ever bring. We live for you. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love to those around me. Jesus, the name above every other name. Jesus, the only one who could ever save. Worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Oh, we live for you. Holy, there is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and show me who you are and fill me with your heart and lead me in your love. Well, good morning. Welcome to Eagle's Nest. I'm Paul. This is Taylor. We have the privilege of leading you in worship. It's a little chilly outside. I don't know about you, but I had to grab my winter coat this morning. So welcome to the warmth. And let's continue to praise our Heavenly Father. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. Great are you, Lord. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. And great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. Every voice. And all the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. One more time. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry. These bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise. We pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs. So we pour out our praise to you, oh.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our service. It's hard to believe that this Thursday is Thanksgiving. Where does the time go? Now, before we get started this morning, I want to go on record that I will not be worrying about my diet this coming Thursday, nor will I be worrying about my diet this coming Friday, because that's leftover day. I'm going to eat what I want, and I'm not going to feel guilty about it, and I'll begin working on it on Saturday, and I give you permission to do the same. Thanksgiving is a great time. It's a time to be thankful and celebrate. It's a time to enjoy all that God has given us. And yet, if we're honest, this Thanksgiving, we kind of find ourselves in the midst of a lot of uncertainty, kind of like they did in America in 1941. In 1941, when Americans celebrated Thanksgiving, the Second World War was raging in Europe and in Britain. The Nazi had swept across Europe, and Britain was on the brink of collapse. It was a time of great uncertainty. In fact, in just 11 days after that Thanksgiving, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th and plunged America into the World War. And their level of uncertainty must have gone through the roof. Now, we can be thankful today that we don't find ourselves in a world war. But if we're honest, it kind of feels like we are. COVID still rages. Governments are still threatening lockdowns. China is saber-rattling towards Taiwan and Australia. Russia wants to invade the Ukraine. Inflation rages. And worst of all, we can't be sure that our Christmas present's going to arrive on time. We may not be in a world war, but it certainly feels like we are. I vividly remember my mom talking about the Second World War. She would often say that they couldn't get tires for their cars or they couldn't get butter for their bread. Shortages and rations became the norm during the Second World War. And so we find ourselves in a time a lot like it, with a lot of uncertainty and this feeling that things just aren't going right. And so how do we find peace this Thanksgiving? I think the answer is found in a question asked by Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister of Britain, when he came to the United States on December 26th to speak to a joint session of Congress in response to the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. He began his 35-minute speech on a light note, saying if my father had been an American and my mother British, instead of the other way around, he said, I might have gotten here on my own. In that case, this would not have been the first time that you heard from my voice. But after that light note, Churchill then addressed the brutal reality that the world was facing at the time. Britain was standing alone against the Nazi, but was reeling. Most of Europe was already under the heels of the Nazi. Half of the American Navy was at the bottom of the Hawaiian harbor. There was little to no air force. The Japanese and Germans were a menace, and the world was about to face many unpleasant surprises in their fight against the Germans. But more importantly, Churchill directed a question to the Japanese. What kind of people do they think we are? Is it possible that they do not realize that we shall never cease to persevere against them until they've been taught a lesson which they and the world would never forget? Now, when Churchill asked that question, he wasn't really directing it to the Japanese as much as he was directing it towards we Americans. And it was a stroke of genius on his part, because he got Americans thinking about who we are and who we were back then without offending us. I mean, that's a communication stroke of genius. England had already decided who they were. They were fighters. But America had not decided who they were or who they would be at this time. And that would be very important because peace in uncertain times comes from knowing who we are. When everything around us is a moving target, when the ground beneath our feet is shaking, the only thing that we have left that we can be certain about is who we are. That is, if we've answered that question. Today, we finish our series, Finding Jesus, a look at the Beatitudes. In Matthew 5:11-16, Jesus tells us who we are. He says we are like the prophets, we are like salt, we are like light. Now, I've already preached on this text, so I'm not going to do that again today. You can find this message on our website on September 29th, 2019. But today I want to talk to you about how to rediscover who we are as prophets, salt, and light in the world so that we can find peace in these uncertain times. And to do that, we're going to look at 3 stories found in the book of Daniel, because the book of Daniel was written for times such as this. First of all, we need to recognize that you and I, we are our beliefs. Daniel determined what he believed. Someone once said that the most important system in our body is our belief system. And they're right, because who we are flows out of what we believe. We see this in the book of Daniel, chapter 1. The Babylonian culture, the Babylonians took over the Jewish nation, and the Babylonian culture tried to cancel biblical Judaism. Let me say that again. The Babylonian culture tried to cancel biblical Judaism. But Daniel had already decided what he believed, and what he believed determined what he would do. It says in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now, when we read this story, the odd thing is that in Daniel chapter 1, verses 1-2, it tells us that God had handed Judah over to the Babylonians. The Babylonians didn't defeat Judah and Jerusalem. God handed them over. Now, why would God do this? Well, first of all, Israel had been breaking its covenant with God for centuries. And so after centuries of worshiping idols and committing social injustice against each other, God finally had enough, and he judged the nation, and he sent them into captivity. Now, Daniel and his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were taken into captivity as well as everybody else. In an effort to assimilate them into the Babylonian culture, they were given Babylonian names, educated in Babylonian literature, given jobs in the Babylonian court, and made to eat Babylonian food. Now, does any of this sound remotely familiar? Folks, this is what's happening in our world today. Postmodern culture is trying to erase and cancel biblical Christianity from our society. Don't fool yourself. This is happening. But here's the rub. Judah was handed over to the Babylonians by God. And folks, the mess we find ourselves in has at least been allowed by God. I'm not saying that COVID got started by God. I don't believe that at all. I think God's allowed it. But the question would be, why would God allow such a thing? Well, the answer to this, I think, is that God's people seem to do better as a visiting team. For over 200 years, Christians in America have been playing on the home field. We've had the home field advantage. Our culture was built around and upon Judeo-Christian values. It's what ordered our society. It's what was at the roots and foundations of our laws. Judeo-Christian values were the hub our society revolved around. That's no longer the case. Now, here's what we know about difficult times. Throughout Scripture, they always serve to make God's people rediscover who they are. Difficult times force God's people to answer the question, who do we think we are? You know, by the time Daniel gets to Babylon, he already knew who he was and what he believed. We don't find Daniel in a cave somewhere praying to God for direction on what to do. You don't see him chewing his fingernails. Daniel may not have known what he believed when he left Babylon, left Jerusalem, but somewhere along that 1,600-mile hike from Jerusalem to Babylon, he figured out what he believed. He decided what he believed and what he would and wouldn't do. So before they ever put a pork sandwich in front of good old Daniel, he already knew he wouldn't eat it. Before they cooked him some bacon and eggs, he knew he was not going to eat the bacon. The eggs were okay, but he wasn't going to eat the bacon. You know, I kind of needed to make some of these decisions over Halloween. Boy, Halloween was tough. They kept putting Reese's cups. We bought some candy for the kids, and for about 2 weeks, I kept hearing the Reese's cups call my name from our pantry. But unlike Daniel, I decided to eat. Now, one could argue that in light of the circumstances Daniel found himself in, that God would have forgiven Daniel for eating the king's meat. I mean, if you look at the prophet Ezekiel, he gave him a pass. In Ezekiel chapter 4, verses 12 through 14, we'll find that Ezekiel was told that he was going to have to eat his food cooked over human dung. Daniel refused. He said, I've not ever had anything unclean to eat. And God then allowed him to use cow dung. But this still would make his food unclean according to Jewish law. And God certainly forgave Ezekiel for that. And so God would have very easily and gladly forgiven Daniel given the situations he was in. But Daniel made a personal choice to live out and practice his faith no matter what came his way. He would follow his God by not eating the food that was forbidden to him as a Jew. And just as God was with Ezekiel, who lived at the same time, by the way, God was with Daniel. And so like Daniel, one of the ways we can reclaim our identity or get clear about our identity is to determine what we believe, because what we believe determines what we do. So we are what we believe, or we become what we believe. Secondly, we are our boundaries. When we read in the book of Daniel, we find that Daniel's friends refused to bow. Back in the book of Exodus, when God gave the 10 Commandments, he was giving his boundaries. When God revealed himself to Israel, which is what he was doing on Mount Sinai, he came down on the mountain, he's saying, "Hi, I'm God." And then he gave him the 10 Commandments. Now, in essence, these 10 Commandments are God's boundaries. God was saying, if you want a relationship with me, you'll have to respect these boundaries. You know, don't worship other gods, don't take my name in vain, etc. Folks, we are our boundaries. You know, people ask, when people come in and talk to me, who am I? I ask them, what are your boundaries? What are the things that you believe are right and wrong? What do you believe about life? What will you do and not do? Our boundaries reveal who we are. Our boundaries are what we refuse to bow to. You know, over the years, as I've done marriage counseling with folks, or premarital counseling particularly, I get them to list out what their boundaries are, and they'll often look at me and say, I don't know what my boundaries are. I'll say, well, tell me what makes you angry. Because we get angry when our boundaries are violated. In fact, you can look at this week. The next time you get angry, take a look at, why am I angry? Ask the question, why am I angry? I guarantee you, if you begin to do that long enough, you'll discover that you have some boundaries. Your boundaries are the way you want to be treated. And when people don't treat you according to those boundaries, you get angry. That's because a lot of our anger is just a result of people crossing our boundaries. Now, I could say more about this, but I don't want to lose track of the sermon we're actually preaching today. And so God has boundaries. He says, don't do these things or it will affect our relationship and it could make him angry. Now, folks, let me just say before I go any further that everything in our culture isn't bad. In fact, there are a lot of good things in our culture, like pizza. I love pizza. Don't you like pizza? I love pizza. I love to get pizza on a Sunday afternoon while we watch football. Football's a wonderful thing. Did anybody see that Cowboy game last week when they really, really did well? It's very rare for me to say this, but they did great. Automobiles. Don't you love the fact that we can get in a heated and air-conditioned automobile and drive wherever we want versus 150 years ago? What about indoor plumbing? We were talking about this the other day. Indoor plumbing is a wonderful thing we take for granted. But I can remember my dad was a plumber, and I can remember growing up in the 70s and talking about people that did not have indoor plumbing in the 1970s. It's a wonderful thing. There's a lot of things that are smartphones. You know, smartphones are wonderful things. You can keep track of your schedule. You can check on the news. You can check on sports. Folks, there's a lot of things in our culture that are good. Christmas time, birthday celebrations, the way we do our customs. There's a lot of things that are good in our culture, and we don't want to become antithetical or to get in a war with our culture all the time. So we don't want to become critical. We don't want to fight or whine about everything. But folks, there are some things in our culture that a Christ follower simply can't bow to. You know, for Daniel and his friends, it was worshiping idols. So when Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 3 of the book of Daniel made a gold idol and made everyone bow to it, Daniel and his Daniel wasn't there. His three friends bowed. We don't know where Daniel was, and I'm sure Daniel wouldn't have bowed, but he's not in the story. Daniel's three friends refused to bow. It says in Daniel chapter 3, verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these are the Babylonian names, answered and said to the king, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter." He's asking them, will you bow? He's giving them a chance to bow. He said, nope, we're not going to do it. We don't need an answer. We don't need to worry about this, king. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. Now, everyone in Babylon, except Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, they bowed. This story reminds me of something that happened to me 10, 15 years ago. I'd have to think really close about how long ago it was, but it's been at least 10 years. And I've shared this story before, but it bears repeating. My youngest son, Caleb, at the time when he was a teenager, he got into that screamo music. It's, you know, that kind of music that kind of sounds like pigs grunting music. Some of you that are parents of kids that are a little bit older now might remember that phase. Well, not only was into that music, he was even in a band. I mean, he really was into this stuff. And he wanted to go to a concert near Baltimore. And so I said, okay, you can go, but I have to go with you. Now, folks, I'm just going to tell you, this was not a nice place. You know, the pot smoke was so thick, I would probably have tested positive if I'd been tested. I mean, it was bad. Now, in one of those sessions, the leader of the band, he got up and he said, I want everyone to get on a knee. He said, either you're with us or against us. If you don't bow, you're not with us. Well, everyone in the area, there's about, in this particular stage, it's maybe 1,000 people or so. Everyone but me took a knee. I'm like, I'm not taking no knee. I mean, I'm thinking of this story here in Daniel. So there I was, standing all alone in a crowd as the speaker was saying, you're either with us or against us. Man, I felt the pressure of not bowing. I felt like everybody was looking at me. And in actuality, no one ever said anything to me. No one ever really tried to hassle me or anything. So I was kind of surprised by that. But the truth of the matter is, it was not a comfortable feeling. And this was just so that people wouldn't hassle me. I can only imagine what it must have been for Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego to be standing there at the threat of death. They're standing and everybody else is bowing. Folks, they had to know what they believed, and they had to know in advance what they would not bow to, because they had boundaries. They had beliefs and boundaries that would not allow them to worship these gods, and so they wouldn't compromise. This reminds me of another time when I was in ninth grade. When I was in ninth grade, I was in the gym locker room one day, and we had just finished gym, and I was there on the bench, and I was leaning over tying my shoe, when one of my classmates came in. He was kind of like a bully, and I'm sitting on the bench tying my shoes with my head bowed over, and he put his hand on my head, and he said to me, I'm not going to let you up unless you pray to me. Now, I wasn't the greatest Christian at the time, but I said to him, never. And then being the carnal Christian I was, I kind of played my own bluff, and I said, now, I'm not going to bow to you, but when I get up, I'm going to beat the living snot out of you. That scared the bully, and he let me up. Folks, I'm not encouraging you to threaten back to beat somebody up like I did in ninth grade, but I will say this, there are some things that we're going to have to get a hold of that we just can't bow to in our culture. We're living at a time when cancel culture wants us to bow, and we just have to simply refuse. You know, the other day I was scanning my smart TV, and I like to watch things. I'm watching archaeology, I watch preachers, I watch a lot of different things. I watch old shows, you know, old black and white shows from the 50s and 60s. It's kind of cool. But as I was searching through, I saw an article by Bill Maher. Now, I'm not in the habit of listening to Bill Maher. In fact, I'm not sure I ever had listened to Bill Maher before, because what little bit I've heard on the news, he can be quite foul. But something in the headline caught my eye. And so I decided to watch this 5-6 minute video. And as I watched, I found myself agreeing with him. I'm like, the world must be upside down. Here I am agreeing with Bill Maher. And the reason why I was agreeing with him, that he was saying that we should not bow to the cancel culture, or we too will be canceled. This is coming from Bill Maher. He's no Christian. In fact, I would call him anti-Christian. But Bill Maher is recognizing what's going on in our culture, that our culture is going too far, that we can't bow to this cancel culture, or we're all going to end up being canceled. Now, the reason I bring this up is it illustrates how bizarre the times we really are in. Cancel culture is so obvious that someone like Bill Maher sees it, and I can agree with Bill Maher. When I can agree with Bill Maher, I believe the world's upside down. We're in a bizarre world. And so we as Christ followers, we have to stop being afraid of being canceled and called names. You know, we don't need to argue with people. Let me encourage you, we don't need to argue with people. In fact, I'd encourage you not to argue with people. We don't have to get nasty, and we don't have to be harsh or rude. We just simply have to learn to say no. No, we will not bow, and we will not be afraid of being canceled. The honest truth is, folks, we got to get used to playing as a visiting team. You know what I mean. You know, when you were a visiting team, you know, when you played sports, you know, the crowd was against you. I mean, think about the Seattle Seahawks. They call the fans a 12th man, because when you play on their field, it's kind of hostile. It's hard to play in Seattle because the fans are so into the game. And our culture has changed. The thin veneer of Christianity is gone. And that's all we really had in the 1950s. It was a veneer of Christianity. Our culture was organized around, but not everybody was a Christian, but everybody understood Christianity. Christianity was the favored religion, and now that's all changed. Now we're kind of like the nail that sticks up, and from time to time there are those that want to hammer us down. And so what we need to do in times like ours is we need to determine our boundaries, or we're going to be swept away by the culture. Because, folks, when we discover who we are and we live out who we are, we can be certain of what we believe, what we will and won't bow to, and we can be certain of what we're going to do or not do. Because that's our third thing that we can do. We are our behavior. Daniel practiced his faith even when it became illegal. Now, I know that many Christians may argue with me on this one when I say we are our behavior. They'll say something like, you know, like the 10th Avenue North song that would say we're more than what we do. And there's a truth in that. I agree with that we're more than our behavior. But the Bible does say that we'll be judged by our works. In Revelation 20:12, it says, "And I saw the dead, the small and the great, standing before God. And the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works by the things which were written in the books." Now, the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ is this, is that Jesus Christ came to clear the books. He came to erase the books. He came to erase everything that we've done so that we won't be judged by our works. But that's where our faith comes in. And the book of James tells us that our faith is revealed through our works. And so by putting faith in Christ, it doesn't mean we stop our works. It doesn't mean that our behavior doesn't matter. That's not really what the Bible teaches. James 2:18 says, "But someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works.'" The Bible tells us that Daniel showed his faith by his works. When his enemies were conspiring against Daniel, they understood that they could never get Daniel to do anything against his faith. Read that in Daniel chapter 6. It's actually quite telling. They knew that Daniel was going to practice his faith. And so what they did is they decided that they couldn't get Daniel to stop doing what he was going to do for God. They couldn't get him to cross his boundaries. They couldn't get him to stop believing in his God. And so what they decided to do was to make his faith, his practices, his expression of faith illegal. It says in verse 10 of chapter 6, now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, they went to the king and they got a law signed. They got a law passed. And when he was signed, he went home and in his upper room with his window open towards Jerusalem, open window, so everybody could hear, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. To take Daniel down, the leaders of the Persian Empire, they conspired to convince the king to make it illegal to pray to anyone but the king. Now, the Bible teaches us that government's a good thing and it's established by God for our good, but this is clearly government overreach. This is clearly government gone wild. Now, I am so thankful that we live at a time that we don't have to deal with any kind of government overreach today. I'm so thankful that no government's ever tried to shut churches down, that no leaders overreach, that every law that we make in our world today is wonderful and thoughtful and always based on science. I'm thankful that we're that objective. Now, if you can't tell I'm being sarcastic, I'm being sarcastic. Government overreach is a problem. And what we have here in the book of Daniel, and this is what I'm trying to, as we read the scriptures, as you read these stories, understand that they're going through things like we're going through today. These folks, these scriptures relate to what we deal with. These guys are dealing with government overreach, trying to tell them what to believe, to bow. They're trying to get them to bow to the cultural pressure and the gods that they served. And folks, they had to determine what they were going to do. These stories were written about them, but they're for us. And so we need to remember that just like in their day, it's true in our day that government is downstream of culture. The beliefs and values of a culture today become the laws of the government tomorrow. And if the government is broken, don't blame the government, look to the culture. And our culture has rejected. It's in the process of rejecting the Judeo-Christian worldview. And it's adopted a new religion called postmodernism. Postmodernism is simply a modern version of something called Gnosticism. Gnosticism was a religious belief that fed off Christianity in the beginning of the 2nd century. It was an anti-creedal, an anti-Christian type of religion. It was fluid. That means it was ever-changing. It borrowed and stole from all the religions around it. It was a synthesis. They combined pagan religions, Persian religions, Judaism, Christianity, and even Greek philosophy. But more importantly, it was about the self. The individual self was God. And it attempted to reshape Christian beliefs into this new religion. In other words, it tried to get Christianity to bow and the Christians to bow to these new beliefs. Similarities between Gnosticism and postmodernism are easy to see. Mark Sayers writes in Disappearing Church, he says, Gnosticism is an attempt to retain the fruits of Christianity and the solace of faith while maximizing the individual's authority. It is the post-Christian impulse par excellence. In other words, we are dealing today with things they've dealt with before in the Bible and throughout church history. And that's why knowing what we believe is so important. And I think it's important now for Christians and churchgoers and people that follow Christ to really begin to examine what we believe, especially at a time like Thanksgiving. Because at Thanksgiving, it's a time for us to be thankful for all that God has given to us. And we have been blessed in the United States of America. We are a blessed country, but it's because of our Judeo-Christian roots. And what Mark Sayers is telling us is that today's religion is trying to retain the fruits of these blessings without retaining the foundation of these blessings. And folks, if history is any kind of source of truth, we know that's not going to work. Now, I don't think Christianity is going to be outlawed in America anytime soon. I'm not thinking we're going to wake up in the next couple weeks and they're going to make it illegal for us to practice our faith. I'm more concerned of the growing threats of China to Taiwan and how Japan's going to respond than I am, but that our religion is going to become illegal. I'm more concerned with the climate of our culture than anything else. Because government is downstream of our culture, and our culture is becoming more anti-Christian. In fact, in 2019, before COVID, only 14% of all U.S. adults said they never went to church. In 2020, that number jumped to 53%. That's an almost 40% jump in 12 months. Folks, that means that people are attending church less, that Christianity has less influence in our culture. There's something shifting in our culture. And what concerns me is not so much what's going on in our culture as much as what's going on inside of us, the church. According to Barna, in 2019, before COVID, 100% of practicing Christians and churched adults had gone to church within the past 6 months. 6 months into the COVID pandemic, between 19 and 22% hadn't gone to church at all. That's digitally. That means online, because we recognized that during COVID we needed to be careful, and so most churches started digital services. Then they opened up again physically or reopened. But Barna is saying that 6 months into the pandemic, 19 to 22% stopped going to church totally. Please let that sink in. That's 1 in 5 churchgoers. Whether online or live, they simply stopped attending all forms of church in 2020. Folks, what's going on? There's things happening in our world that are shaking our foundations. There's things that are in our world that are very uncertain. And if we continue sliding into this postmodernism, well, if government's downstream, it's going to affect the laws that we make. Now, we still have a lot to be thankful for this Thanksgiving. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. I am trying, especially in holidays, and one of the things I like to do in holidays is I like to get us to not only celebrate, but I also like us to think about things. And one of the things I don't want to do in any given holiday is I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room. And folks, this Thanksgiving, as we gather for Thanksgiving, this is one of those Thanksgiving, and it has been for the last couple years, that feels a little bit more like the Thanksgiving that the people celebrated in 1941 than it does what we celebrated in 2010 or 2015. We find ourselves living in a lot of uncertainty, just like they did during the Second World War. You know, as we wrap up this series on the Beatitudes, we find that Jesus points us to how we can maintain peace in the midst of all this uncertainty. We've got to live out our purpose. We've got to be like the prophets. Sometimes we have to go up against the culture. We have to be like salt. Sometimes we have to be like light. We need to rediscover who we are. One of the best ways to regain certainty in an uncertain world is to determine our beliefs, to determine our boundaries, and determine our behavior. That's how we fulfill the words of Jesus, to be like the prophets, to be like salt, and to be like light. Celebrate this Thursday, but also meditate on these things. Father, I pray for everyone under the sound of my voice. Father, we need to celebrate. In fact, we need celebration now more than probably we've ever needed it before. And so I pray that you would help us to be able to remove the distractions and all the uncertainty and really focus on being grateful and thankful for the blessings. But also, Lord, as we're doing that, Father, help us to spend a little of our time just thinking about, what do we really believe? Who are we? Who do we think we are? And who do you say that we are? Because, Lord, it's knowing in who we are that will provide us certainty and stability in a time that's very uncertain and very unstable. And, Father, that can give us peace. Father, bless us this Thanksgiving with peace. Bless all your people, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope to see you next week when we're going to take a look at the 23rd Psalm and how that the Good Shepherd can give us peace in the midst of our storms. And that will be followed as we start in the month of December, our new Christmas series called Peace. We're going to be looking at specifically, how can we find peace in these uncertain times? Hope to see you next week. God bless.
sing. This is my surrender. This is my surrender. Here is where I lay it down. You are all I'm chasing. This is my surrender. This is my surrender.
Where is your identity gone? What are you even identifying with? Do you find yourself on one side of a never-ending argument or debate? And how is your stress level? Look, this is the final message in our series, Finding Jesus. Could it be that we need to redefine and redetermine in our own hearts to identify as a Christ follower? I know it's a bit antiquated, but it remains a valid question as we interface with other people in person, in email, on social media, on phone or text. Ask yourself the question once again, what would Jesus do? Good morning, friends. We're glad you've joined us for today's online service. If you've tuned in for the first time, we're glad you did. Welcome. We would love to know that you're out there. You can let us know that by sending us an email to hello@eaglesnest.ch. You're also invited to join us live every Sunday at 9:30. We have Eagles Nest Kids handling our nursery through fifth graders and our Eagles Nest Youth for middle school students during the 9:30 service. If you're looking for any past sermons or worship music or any other Eagles Nest content, we have that as well. You can start at our website, eaglesnest.ch, where you can look for Realm, social media, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. This weekend, we were privileged to baptize several friends who are ready to take the next step in their faith journey. If that's you, please reach out to us and let us know how we can serve you. We are now into the holiday season. Thanksgiving is this week. We're only 4 days away. We hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving with your friends and family. Christmas is only 35 days away, and we are now prepping for our Christmas series, Peace. That series starts December 5th, and we hope that you'll join us this Christmas season, which will continue all the way through our special live Christmas Eve services. We have this beautiful graphic printed out on postcards you see on the screen with all the details for those services on the back. We're going to start handing them out this weekend here in the building. We encourage you to take one, put it on your fridge, and join us, and take an extra one or two to share with a friend or a neighbor in your community. We invite all of you to experience His peace with us this Christmas season. Please also consider joining us in our current Do Good campaign. Eagles Nest is collecting Christmas gift cards for just another 2 weeks through December 5th for local schools to bless local families in need. They're asking for gift cards from primarily Food Lion, Walmart, and we have gift boxes located on our sanctuary doors where you can drop those cards off on Sundays or during the week. If you need more information about Eagles Nest Ministries, any of our events, or if you have any specific questions for us, you can always send an email to hello@eaglesnest.ch and we will connect you with the right person. If you would like to support Eagles Nest Ministries, we appreciate you partnering with us. You can use regular mail or try giving online right on our website. For everyone asking, yes, end of year giving is a thing and it's here. As the new year rapidly approaches, we want to remind you that your gifts to Eagles Nest are tax-exempt donations. They must be postmarked by December 31st for the 2021 tax season. Consider getting back to your identity in Christ. If you've gotten off course, recenter yourself back on the number one thing, your personal relationship with Jesus. What would Jesus do? If you don't know Him, we would love to introduce you to Him. What better way to experience peace this Christmas than to know the Prince of Peace? Or if you have any other needs for prayer, pastoral counsel, or anything else, once again, email our pastoral staff at hello@eaglesnest.ch. Well, listen, we hope you have a great Thanksgiving week. Join us next week for a special message on Psalm 23 before we start our Christmas series December 5th. Thanks for joining us. We hope to see you then. Take care, everyone.